such wonderful wonderful work that's being done here, and so glad to be here with Bill as well. So yeah, I wrote a few songs that these guys were interested in, and this is one I wrote during the dark times, I would say, for myself, of the previous administration. One day I was feeling really dark, so this is that song. It's called "Looking Out for You and Me." And I was driving to a friend's house early one morning, and this song kind of popped in my head. It's called "Rising Waters." Some say it's too late, we've set the course somehow, we're in it now. Waters are rising around me. There's a storm outside, but inside, trouble won't let me be.
banjo player Bennett Sullivan. All right. We're very honored to be a part of this event. Thanks so much, Bill, for being here. Thanks for coming to Asheville.
We'll do one more here. We'll do one that I got Lauren hooked on us, I guess. This is one, yeah, it's about the polarization in this country. You know, issues like climate change and, you know, protecting our environment that we all share. Every one of us. I don't understand. I've never understood how that is a partisan issue. I don't understand how you can be over here, and not care about drinking water and air and things like that. And I don't know, I was feeling really upset the day I wrote this as well. I guess. You know, and, yeah, anger, and I have anger issues. I'll tell you since I do. This is a song about trying to come together, and you know, it's called Where Do You Stand?
Welcome. So happy you are all here tonight. Feeling really deeply inspired to be in a room full of people who love nature, care about community, and want the best for humanity. We really want to channel that care into living in ways that make the world a healthier place for people in all species. So my name is Sam New York. I'm the Executive Director for GreenBuilt Alliance, a local Asheville-based nonprofit. Our team at GreenBuilt Alliance is dedicated to advancing sustainable living, green building, and climate justice through inspired action, community education, and collaborative partnerships in Western North Carolina and beyond. We strive for bold action for a livable planet. Your attendance tonight helps us serve our community through a lot of different ways. One of us through our Energy Savers Network program, which provides energy efficiency upgrades for low-income houses. We've done over 850 of those in the past 5 years. This also helps. These are the families that live in homes and mobile homes that have the highest energy burden. So every dollar we save with them really helps them and their families. We also, your attendance tonight helps support our neighbor program, which is installing solar panels on homes that typically have been left out of the clean energy movement, lowering our community's carbon footprint to one home at a time. This event also supports the Blue Horizons Project, which is setting the course for clean energy in our community and helping anyone in this county find resources they need to save money and energy. And through GreenBuilt Homes, which provides certification for homes that protect the land, conserve water and energy, are non-toxic, and use renewable materials. And through Appalachian Offsets, our local carbon offset program that funds clean energy projects and upgrades for local schools and nonprofits. Like the Isaac Dixon Elementary School, we funded that 350 kilowatt system, and we're in the process of funding the United Way project on South Spring Broad right now. Yeah, we really appreciate you being here tonight to support this work. It's only through pulling our resources together and our knowledge and the collective efforts that we can make the tremendous shift that's going to be required to provide a world that our children are going to be grateful to inherit. So if anyone interested in learning more about GreenBuilt Alliance or wishes to contribute to some of these programs, you can come to our website or see one of our team members. It's only through pulling all these efforts together we can actually make this all happen. So we're grateful that a pioneer for the quest for a livable planet is with us here tonight. We're grateful that Bill McKibben has come to join us. And we're also grateful to have Lauren Steiner here who helped motivate and organize this event.
Go Lauren!
So I'll give a little brief intro to Lauren, and then she'll take it away to ask Bill some fascinating questions. So Lauren is a former cable television professional and current organizer, activist, and independent journalist who moved to Fairview a year and a half ago. For the past 5.5 years, she has produced and hosted on a Facebook and YouTube show called The Robust Opposition. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. Where she interviews organizers, activists, authors, journalists, and progressive candidates and elected officials. She focuses on issues that she's become activist on, including the climate crisis. Having interviewed Mr. McKibben twice, she contacted him when she found out that he was coming to the keynote at the Asheville Ideas Festival earlier today, and asked him if he would be so kind as to do one more event in Asheville to benefit our neighbor-to-neighbor low-income solar program. And he graciously said yes. So without further ado, please welcome Lauren Steiner, who will
Test. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming and joining us for this very important evening. And thank you to Bill for doing his third event of the day. It's really awesome. Bill McKibben is the founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate and justice. His 1989 book, The End of Nature, is regarded as the first book for a general audience about climate change and has appeared in 24 languages. He's gone on to write 20 books, and his work appears regularly in periodicals from the New Yorker to Rolling Stone. He serves as the Schumann Distinguished Scholar in Environmental Studies at Middlebury College, as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And he has won the Gandhi Peace Prize, as well as honorary degrees from 20 colleges and universities. He was awarded the Right Livelihood Award, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel, in the Swedish Parliament. Foreign Policy named him to its inaugural list of the world's 100 most important global thinkers. Bill helped found 350.org, the first global grassroots climate campaign which has organized protests on every continent, including Antarctica, for climate action. He played a leading role in launching the opposition to big oil pipeline projects like Keystone XL and the fossil fuel divestment campaign, which I'm still trying to get my university, Wesleyan University, to do. Which has become the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history, with endowments worth more than 40 trillion stepping back from oil, gas, and coal. He stepped down as board chair of 350 in 2015 and left the board and stepped down from his volunteer role as senior advisor in 2020, accepting emeritus status. He lives in the mountains above Lake Champlain with his wife, the writer Sue Halpern, where he spends as much time as possible outdoors. In 2014, biologists credited his career by naming a new species of woodland gnat. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Megophalmedia McKibbeni, in his honor. I first learned of Bill when I read his first book, The End of Nature, which came out in 1989. It was when I first learned of the phenomenon of global warming, which he called the greenhouse effect. It resonated with me because I had long held the philosophy that human beings should try to exist as part of nature, not try to master it. And that our reason, which we learned to use in the Enlightenment, had been both a blessing and a curse. In searching for the most impactful paragraph from that book, I found this one in the last chapter, and this is what I want to ask my first question about. Quote, "But this could be the epoch when people decide at least to go no farther down the path we've been following. When we make not only the necessary technological adjustments to preserve the world from overheating, but also the necessary mental adjustments to ensure that we'll never again put our good ahead of everything else's. This is the path I choose, for it offers at least a shred of hope for a living, eternal, meaningful world. Should we so choose, we could exercise our reason to do what no other animal can do. We could limit ourselves voluntarily. Choose to remain God's creatures instead of making ourselves gods." That was written 33 years ago. Bill, have you seen that there's been any progress in either the technological adjustments or maybe more importantly, the mental adjustments necessary to keep the world from overheating?
Well, so first of all, let me just say, take a breath first before I ask some deep questions. So, let me first just say what a pleasure it is to get to be here with you all.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Can't give him the microphone.
Turned on my microphone. Is it not microphoning?
It's only you might just want to move it up a little bit.
Move it up a little bit. Is that any better?
Yeah.
If I knock it with my finger, it works. But
Oh,
yeah, now it's closer.
we'll get it closer to my gullet there.
Gullet.
Maybe that'll help a little bit.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
So first of all, what a pleasure to be here. I may not be at my absolute best because due to the America's transportation system, I arrived at 3:30 in the morning this morning. And I've been talking all day, but it's a real pleasure to be here and a real pleasure to get to help raise a little money for the GreenBuilt Alliance. I'll be looking forward to signing some books to help raise them a little money and stuff, but mostly just to be able to say extraordinary thanks to everybody here because Asheville is one of those, one of those 9 or 10 spots around the country on my kind of mental map that it's necessary for, that I just rely on knowing that there's good people doing good and important things. And so it's good to check in every few years and make sure that that's still true. And I'm glad to see that it is. And if I could have one point of personal privilege too, it would just be to say it's really fun for me to see Dana Smith here. I don't know how many of y'all are aware of all the work at the Dogwood Alliance, but nothing that's happening in Asheville that's having more effect on the global climate and on, how much carbon's in the atmosphere and things. That's absolutely crucial and really hard work. So thank you for doing that very, very, very much. So, yeah, look, technologically, we're in a better place than we were 30 years ago. We know exactly what we need to be doing now. Scientists done a hell of a job. We've, in the last 10 years, dropped the price of solar power and wind power 90%, and the batteries to store it when the sun goes down or the wind stops blowing. This is now the cheapest power on planet Earth. And that's, that's incredible to think about. You don't really sense it that much always when you're, here where we are, because, we're used to power and the fact that it's coming from the sun, you don't hardly even notice necessarily. But when you're out in parts of the world that have never had power, again, no one, and was never going to under current arrangements, but suddenly solar power got cheap enough. I was telling the story earlier today at the university of being in Africa doing some reporting for the New Yorker on very, very remote parts of Ghana and the Ivory Coast, where they just had managed to turn on power from the day before in this one village I was in, from a little array of 40 solar panels. And so I was sitting there in the, with the elders in the village, and it was extremely hot, because it's always extremely hot in Ghana, and they kept passing me bottles of cold water to drink, for which I was grateful, because I come from Vermont. The heat does not agree with me, but it took me 20 minutes in my clueless Western way to realize the reason they were so proud to be passing me all these bottles of cold water was that until the day before there'd never been a refrigerator in this place. They never really had anything cold, and now they did. And the fact that you could get that the easiest way to get power on Earth is now to just point a sheet of glass at the sun that's Hogwarts scale magic that we're talking about, and incredibly beautiful to see. And what it means is that if we wanted to, I wrote a piece for the New Yorker earlier this year saying, look, we could basically end the 200,000-year human hobby of setting things on fire. That's what we've been doing since we sort of emerged as a species, and it served us well. We cooked food and got nice big brains as a result, and we had campfires and all learned to hang out together and develop into a social species. And then came the Industrial Revolution, and we built everything around us by burning coal and gas and oil. But it's not serving us well anymore, and we don't need it anymore. The Methodist Sunday school teacher in me likes to point out that the good Lord was kind enough to hang a large ball of burning gas 93 million miles away in the sky, and we now have the wit to make full use of it, so we should. And so that part of it is remarkable. The technological changes are, 30, 40 years ago, we didn't know exactly. Solar power then was still an expensive proposition. The weird part is that the other part of this equation, the kind of human part, learning to take a step back and things, has gotten just steadily harder and harder and harder. Our society's become ever more politically dysfunctional and sort of politically, socially dysfunctional. If you had told anybody in this room 35 years ago that we would have reached the point, when I wrote that we would have reached the point where we'd be having people invading the U.S. Capitol and killing police officers in the course of trying to stop the counting of votes in an election, people would have said that's ridiculous. That wouldn't happen here. If you told people that there'd be large parts of the country that felt it too much of an imposition to wear a mask to try and keep other people from getting a deadly disease, so, well, that sounds unlikely. So it's that's the difficult part of this. And that's actually, in some ways, what this new book is about, is sort of looking back and trying to figure out a little bit where we went, where things began to go south. And it's a lot about the kind of rise of a hyper-individualism that but came to full flower with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, and a kind of very fateful choice between two paths for our country. And I don't know, I mean, it's not completely clear to me that this is a I mean, we're trying extraordinarily hard to pull ourselves out of this tailspin, or some of us are. That's the work we're doing at Third Act and elsewhere that we'll get to. But it's, that's the work, you know, right now, is trying to figure out how to build enough of a working society that we can do the kind of things that we desperately need to do right now. In order to keep ourselves from, well, among other things, from incinerating ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a long answer.
Well, it's just people doing without and deconsumerizing, or a lot of environmentalists use the term degrowth. I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Do you?
No.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward to 2013. A year after I learned what fracking was, and that it was being done in the middle of my city, Los Angeles, the largest urban oil field in North America, I became a full-on fractivist, as we call ourselves. 2013 was the first time I actually heard Bill speak. It was a week after he got arrested for blockading the White House over the Keystone XL pipeline. It was a freezing day in February in Washington, D.C., but there were 40,000 others of us gathered at the largest climate rally in U.S. history. I never shared this with you, Bill, but I was part of a small group that organized one of the 20 solidarity rallies that was in L.A.
Oh, yes.
We had 1,500 people at our rally, and after I was in person there in D.C., I went to where I was staying and watched my comrades in LA out there in t-shirts, and I was so jealous because I was wearing my Russian, you know, full fur hat type of thing. So cold. You remember how cold that was. Anyway, right after that, we decided we did such a great job organizing this rally, we were going to form the Southern California Climate Action Coalition, which ultimately became a chapter of 350.org. And but at that DC rally, at the end of your speech, you said this: "All I ever wanted to see is a movement to stop climate change, and now I've seen it. You are the antibodies kicking in as the planet tries to fight its fever. Our theme has to be, when you are in a hole, stop digging. It is our job to make sure the planet does not catastrophically overheat. The oil companies aren't going to do that. Their business model is to make money destroying the earth. The government is not going to do that. They're too busy taking money from oil companies. History shows, although we are never going to outspend the fossil fuel industry, we can find other currencies to work with: passion, spirit, creativity, the powerful love of the future that brought you here today. We can see all the generations to come, and so we know why we fight. We can see the beauty of the world we've been given, the cold of a winter day, the color on an autumn hillside, and so we know why we fight. We know our brothers and our sisters in the poorest parts of the world are suffering. I cannot promise you we're going to win, but I waited a quarter century since I wrote the first book about this stuff to see if we were going to fight. And today, at the biggest climate rally by far in U.S. history, today I know we're going to fight." Nearly a decade later, Bill, what is your assessment of the climate movement you helped build? Have we achieved significant victories? Do you see us beating this thing?
So those are two different questions. We definitely have achieved all kinds of significant victories in that, I mean, there wasn't a climate movement until about 2008, 2009. That's when we sort of started 350.org. There was all the superstructure of a movement. There's always been great policy people who knew what we should be doing, and great scientists, Al Gore, and we had all the superstructure of a movement. We just didn't have the movement part. And that's what we started trying to fill in when we started 350.org, and we grew it around the world, organized 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea at this point. And so that's been and it's been fight after fight after fight. Keystone XL and fracking in place after place, and the Dakota Access Pipeline and divestment, and some of these we've had big wins, some we've lost. But the point of a movement at that scale, its real goal is to use that series of fights, each of them important on its own, to the bigger task of changing the zeitgeist, changing people's sense of what's normal and natural and obvious. And there we have powerfully succeeded. We've reached the point now where 70% of Americans say that climate change is a serious problem that needs strong action. And that's a remarkable, the movement didn't do it by itself. Mother Nature played her role too, and as enough forest fires and big storms and things, and who are you going to believe, Fox News or your own lying eyes, at a certain point. But that is a huge win. And in fact, it's brought us very close to actual important victories. Joe Biden became the first presidential candidate ever to fight an presidential election on climate change because he had to. The Democratic primary, by the last time around, it was the #1 issue for voters, primary after primary. And so, he had to reach an agreement with Bernie and the Sunrise Movement and everybody else to make this a centerpiece of his campaign. And he was faithful to it. That Build Back Better bill is serious. Would be the first serious piece of climate legislation that Congress has ever passed. And we're within a vote of passing it, which is a big change from where we've been before. But,
Joe Manchin.
yeah, Joe Manchin took more money from the fossil fuel industry than anybody else in Washington. And it was money well spent by the Exxons of the world, because for a couple of $1 million in campaign donations, they're able to block hundreds of billions of dollars in desperately needed spending. So, there's some talk now that we'll get at least some of it, that Manchin is, ready to go again, but we've heard this now a number of times. So, I'm afraid that that no rest for the weary. The message is that we need to build these movements larger still, and because our political system and many other political systems around the world are so dysfunctional and so broken, the fact that 70% of people want action on climate change should be enough to generate action on climate change. And I have a bad feeling things may get worse before they get better. We also have to be really good about targeting there's 2 levers big enough to pull here that matter. One of them's marked politics, and the other one's marked money or finance. And that's the other one we've got to pull. And if you think about it, there's some hope there. It's the reason that we worked hard on divestment and that we're now going after banks so hard, which I can describe in detail a little more. But if you think about it, due to our strange constitution and so on, most of the political power in this country, too much of it's come to rest in red parts of the country. I mean, I said earlier today to students at some point, if you can explain to someone from another part of the world why Wyoming gets 2 senators and California gets 2 senators, then you're doing better than me. But money is mostly in the blue parts of the country. 65% of the GDPs in counties that voted for Biden. The big banks are still mostly in New York and San Francisco and Frankfurt and London and Tokyo, which are all places we can organize. Charlotte, too, I guess, has some banks. All places where we can organize and push, and we have to, and hard. So I wish that we were through the movement building part of this and we're able to just concentrate on executing the large-scale changes that need to happen, because there's an awful lot of execution of the kind of work that GreenBuilt people do. That needs to happen all over the country, but it can't happen at that scale and the pace that it needs to happen until we've managed to break the political power of the fossil fuel industry enough to get the money and the focus required to really move it at speed, I think.
Your latest book is fairly pessimistic about the direction our country has gone, specifically regarding patriotism, faith, and prosperity. Would you please sum up the thesis of your book and end by saying where you think the hope lies, if anywhere?
I've already summed it up more or less for you. The subtitle of the book is "A Grain American Looks Back at His Suburban Boyhood and Wonders What the Hell Happened." And it is that story of how did we end up here? Because I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and my summer job was giving tours of the Battle Green, wearing my tricorn hat, and my scout troop raised the flag over the green on the bicentennial morning and things. Some of it's about American history, and those lessons has a lot to do with race in America and what's happening and how we're understanding American history in new ways. And there is a large section about what happened to the kind of religious consensus that once dominated this country. In 1970, when the book begins, 52% of Americans belonged to one of the mainline Protestant churches. They were Methodist, Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Congregationalists. That number's now gone from 52% to about 15%.
Wow.
There's been no larger change really in America than that. And again, as in our sort of political life, that flawed but real attempt at churches that saw themselves as parts of community that helped create and build community has been replaced by an evangelical Christianity that's mostly concerned in the same side of hyper-individualistic way with a kind of one-on-one relationship with a personal savior and so forth. And so I think those changes, but the one that most bears on what we're talking about here is just what happened with what seemed 50 years ago to be a kind of spreading modest prosperity in suburban America, and instead developed into the kind of cartoonish inequality that we see now in this country, and along the way managed to put the biggest pulse of carbon into the air that there's ever been and is ever going to be, even larger than the one that came from the industrialization of China, that came from building a nation built entirely around automobiles, and that's what it was. So the interesting question for me, and maybe you'll get to this later, but just saying, the reason that we're doing this third act stuff now is because it seems to me that those of us who lived through those years have some opportunity and some responsibility to do something about it. I've done most of my organizing work with young people over the years because they're doing most of the organizing. I started 350 with 7 college kids. The Sunrise Movement emerges doing amazing stuff. They're mostly kids who did divestment campaigns in college and wanted to do more. And so when they got out, they did the Green New Deal. And of course, everybody knows the wonderful story of Greta Thunberg and sort of the junior high and high school students who should. Greta's one of my really favorite people on planet Earth, and I love working with her, and she's great. And she'd be the first to point out that there are 10,000 Greta Thunbergs scattered around the country, and they have 10 million followers. That's how many people were out in the streets in September 2019 in these big school strikes all over the world, for climate. But I began to worry that we were taking the biggest problem in the world and just sort of laying it off on 17-year-olds to solve. Before lacrosse practice, could you please also save the world? And that's ignoble, but it's also highly impractical, because for all their energy, inspiration, idealism, intelligence, they lack the crucial ingredient of power. There are 70 million of us over the age of 60 now in this country, 10,000 more every day. which is more people than are born every day in America. And not only are there a lot of us, we punch way above even that weight politically because we all vote. There's no possible way to keep old people away from the polls. And we ended up with most of the money. 70% of the financial assets in the country belong to the baby boomers or the silent generation, compared with about 5% for millennials. So if you want to pressure governments or you want to pressure banks, and I want to pressure both of them, you better have some people from this group. And it has been really fun to start organizing because it's a completely, really no one's tried, at least since the group called the Grey Panthers back 40 years ago.
I'm having trouble hearing.
I'm sorry. The theory is that people become more conservative as they age, and there's some statistical evidence for this. Because, well, you've got more stuff, so you want to protect it or whatever. But we can't let that happen, and in this case, I think we don't need to, because these generations are peculiar. They have an interesting historical DNA. In our first act, if you're 60s, 70s, 80s, you were around for just remarkable, epic, transformational change. I mean, you were around for the years when people decided that they were going to, treat women as if they were, actual parts of society. The years when, we extended the franchise and passed the Voting Rights Act, and the years when we decided for the first time, really, that maybe war was not the best method of solving problems, and the first Earth Day in 1970, which, think about that, 1970, first Earth Day, 20 million people in the streets, 10% of the then population of the US. Within 2 years, we'd passed the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, which is almost incomprehensible to us now, that a political system would translate the actual political desire of people into legislation, and then the legislation would work, and the air and the water would get cleaner, So it's, that first act was good. And the second act, okay. Taken as a whole, maybe a little more focus on consumerism than on citizenship. That water is under the bridge. Now people emerge into their third act. Lots of resources, lots of skills acquired over a lifetime. Some time, which might not have been the case before. And some kids or grandkids in many cases. And kids and grandkids are enough to take the abstract word legacy and actually invest it with real meaning, because, man, they're going to actually have to live on the thing that we've left behind. So it's been really fun to start trying to, and really powerful, especially to be doing it in collaboration with lots of young people. So one of the things we're doing, and this is, again, I'm answering it late.
Yeah, this is the last question. That's okay.
So we'll just
segue into
yes.
it. Yeah.
One of the things we're doing is this big campaign against banks, because there are the four big American banks, Bank of America, Citi, Chase, and Wells Fargo, have lent $1 trillion to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accords. They didn't need Donald Trump to sabotage it. They were happy to do it themselves. And so we're running this campaign where we're getting people to pledge that at year's end, if they haven't made some progress, we're going to all cut up their credit cards together, and I have already great video of Jane Fonda cutting up her credit cards, and, that kind of. But it's been really fun to be doing this with young people. We did these series of demonstrations outside banks, and by the way, just in organizing terms, it was very nice of these four banks to pick the 30,000 highest trafficked retail locations in America because they're all the perfect sites for doing all kinds of interesting work. We've been doing these demonstrations and with young people, and they'll generally, be at the head of the march because they march a little faster. But behind, we've had big crowds of, the last one I was at, we had a big crowd of people, many people was in this room, marching under a banner that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." And I'll just add, the other thing that makes it really fun, and I was thinking about this as Zoe and Cloyd were playing that remarkable music before, which I really enjoyed, to get to hear a little, Asheville did not come through with its usual cool, crisp mountain weather. It was a pleasure to hear some mountain music, and that was really wonderful. One of the things that's been fun about this third act organizing is, and here since I'm a little tired of having, carrying on the okay boomer conversation with young people, I do say to them, say what you will, our generation did produce the best music of all time. Tons of those people are still around, so it's been really fun to be working with Carole King and Bette Midler and Patti Smith and Neil Young and people to try and sort of be in the right spirit for doing all of this, because that's an important part of this work. Somehow is to do it it works better when it's done in the right spirit. So if there's anybody in this room who happens to have crossed that 60-year barrier, come check us out at thirdact.org. It really has been good fun so far.
Yeah.
Yay. It's really funny because I decided to move here maybe about 5 years ago, but I didn't really make the move until the pandemic. It was kind of a kick in the butt. And I kept telling everybody it was my third act.
There you go.
And so to hear that you started this organization, it's like perfect. However, I did start organizing 10 years ago because it was the Occupy movement. I was 50-something at that point, but that really changed my life. And I actually live streamed Jane Fonda taking her money out of the Wells Fargo
There you
Bank.
go.
Yeah, because we had a Move Your Money Day in November of, I think it was 2012. And that's when I took my money out of Wells Fargo and put it into a credit union. So if everybody,
So the key is don't do it by yourself.
Right.
Gotta be a movement. Wells Fargo is actually large enough that they might not notice. So as usual with this work, the most important thing individuals can do is be a little less individual, join together with others in movements large enough to be noticed and heard. And cutting up your credit cards will be the first round, but the next part as next year goes on is going after the kind of larger Costco and Amazon and United and all the people who have, because it turns out that this banking stuff is bigger than we understood. I did a piece for the New Yorker about 3 weeks ago about this new study, and I got to say the numbers blew my mind. Someone finally figured out a good algorithm for calculating how much carbon cash sitting in banks being lent for pipelines and so on produces. If you have $125,000 in the mainstream banking system in this country, it produces each year more carbon than the average American life does. All the cooking, heating, flying, driving, cooling, that's outweighed by the carbon impact of your money just sitting there without you thinking about it. So this is a really important leverage point. And if we can't get Congress to act, maybe we can pressure these guys to act. So, not easy. I mean, we're basically, when we talk about those banks, what we're talking about is the capital part of capitalism. Okay, so it's not like it's a cinch, but it's a fight worth having and pressure worth putting.
so you're talking about we organize a group of people to commit to take our money out of one of these banks. We go and have a rally in which we do it, and we invite the press, and we make a big deal about it.
Yeah, well, and in the meantime, before the end of the year, I mean, it's a good idea to have some presence out of these banks explaining to other people what's going on. I mean, they're a perfect place, and people have been doing weekly presences. I mean, but it's great because they're these are the institutions, I mean, the suburbs are where political power resides in this country, and that's where the banks are, you know? And so it's a perfect place. I think this campaign, these kind of campaigns will just keep growing.
All right, well, I'm going to commit to put a sign-up sheet outside, and if anybody is interested in getting involved with this, if I see enough significant interest, I will help organize this thing.
There you go.
Because I know how to do this. My last question before I open it up to the audience is about religion. So you heard Zoe and Cloyd sing about how we're so polarized in this country and asking if we can meet in the middle. While North Carolina is a purple state and Buncombe County is solidly Democratic, the rest of the counties here in western North Carolina are pretty conservative and also very religious. You teach Sunday school. How do you suggest we talk to those folks about the existential crisis that is climate change?
Huh. I mean, if you have people who are who take the Bible seriously, it's not that hard. I mean, the very first page of the book, which is, I'm afraid, the page that's most likely to have been read by anyone, more than the other pages. The very first page of the book is just a description of God creating the earth and deciding it's a beautiful place and asking us to take care of it. That's our job, you know. Exercise dominion over this. We basically, you know, and a job at which we're signally failing. You know, we're like the bad. You know, we're like, it's like, you know, you left your kid with a babysitter, and you came home from the movies, and your kid now had 3 tattoos and 2 piercings. You know? I mean, that, you know, that's about our standard of care at the moment for the planet. We're running Genesis in reverse. We're decreating things. You know, wiping species out. So that part shouldn't be impossible. And if people take the gospel seriously, I mean, they're just the chief command is just to love one's neighbor, but we're busily drowning our neighbors, you know, making it impossible for them to grow food, spreading disease. So I think it's entirely possible to talk about these things in ways that, but one of the problems is that a kind of right-wing religion and a right-wing political world have gotten very mixed up to each other. I noted yesterday that Lauren Boebert of Colorado gave a speech saying Jesus' problem was he didn't have enough AR-15s to keep his government from killing him. So, I mean, once you've reached that level, you know, the argument becomes more difficult. But it is a good place to be reaching out. And one of the things that's really interesting is that alongside Greta Thunberg, it's possible that the most effective environmentalist in the world right now is Pope Francis. And his encyclical, Laudato Si, is working its way down powerfully. It takes a while in the Catholic Church, a big institution, but it's working its way down through very powerfully into the interstices of that vast church, which represents 1/6 of the people on the planet or something. So there are plenty of resources to draw on, and there's great work being done in, you know, interfaith organizing around climate and things that can be helpful here. So,
you know, the problem is, I had a plumber in Los Angeles who was an evangelical, and I used to argue with him all the time. He was a big Trump supporter, and I thought I had him one day. I came in with this quote from the Bible to explain to him how what Trump was doing was the exact opposite of that, and he said to me with a complete straight face and all seriousness, Trump's word is more than the Bible. Yeah, so that's what we're dealing with.
in 2009, we coordinated 5,200 demonstrations in 181 countries. And we didn't really have Facebook yet or things, but we did, the killer app was something called Flickr, so you could upload pictures all over the place. And so I was in charge. People were sending pictures in from these demonstrations around the world, sometimes 10 and 20 a minute, you know. And so I'd always heard in my life that environmentalism was something that rich white people did. And if you didn't know where your next meal was coming from, you wouldn't be an environmentalist because you had bigger things to worry about and stuff. And it took half an hour of watching these pictures come in to just realize that was nonsense. That almost everybody we were working with was poor and black and brown and Asian and young, mostly because that's what almost everybody on Earth is, you know. And what do you know? They were exactly as concerned about the future as I was, and so that's always stuck with me in very profound ways. But this book is largely about, or large parts of it are about that attempt to kind of understand our history and move on it now, what it means to repair that kind of damage and stand up to it. And it's the deepest of questions.
Okay, I think this is going to be the last question because it's almost 9 o'clock and Bill's been up all day and he does have to sign books. So I'm going to give it to the next generation.
Hey, here in Asheville, we're surrounded by Pisgah National Forest. The Forest Service is planning to quadruple logging here. And I was just wondering what role forests play in addressing the climate crisis.
Well, what a good question, River. Thank you very much for it, and thank you for your work on all this stuff. And this is the place where you want to go work with Dana and the people at Dogwood, because they understand in the most powerful scientific ways that the single easiest, smartest way to keep carbon from flowing into the atmosphere is not cutting down trees. Planting trees is okay, but leaving trees that are already there in place is the easiest, smartest way. There's a couple other reasons to like trees too. They're nice, and you get, you know, lots of critters like them, and they provide shade on a hot day, and blah blah blah. All good. I live my life in the middle of the Green Mountain National Forest, so you know I have a lot more trees for neighbors than people, and that's fine by me. But in carbon terms, they're just magic. And the idea that we're now building an industry that cuts them down to burn them for electricity is literally the stupidest possible way of going about things. And so make common cause with your neighbors there at the Dogwood Alliance to really stand up to that kind of stuff. And thank you very much for preserving the Pisgah and the Nantahala and everything else, because even those of us who aren't on them very often very much like the idea that they're there, and that this incredible biodiverse, rich, moist, lush forest that you all have, it's a really good thing just to know that it's there, sitting happily and quietly decade after decade. So many thanks for helping keep it that way, River. Good. And thanks all, everybody. Thanks all to everybody so much for just, you all are doing the work that needs doing. And as I say, it's a big shot in the arm to me just to know that, as I suspected, everything in Asheville is good and people are keeping the fight going, and I'm very grateful. I'll put my mask on and go sign books if you'd like to raise some money for GreenBuilt Alliance, and that'll be fun. And I'll see you a few more years down the road. Many, many thanks.